In today's story, we learn that Maria Concepcion and her husband Juan were married a year ago in the church with a license that Maria Concepcion paid for. Now she goes by both hers and her husband's surnames as if she owned an entire hacienda. It's on page 773 at the top of the page. Now pregnant, she carries her fowls to market. As she passes the hut where 15-year-old Maria Rosa lives with her godmother Lupe, Maria Concepcion hears the younger girl laughing and sees her own husband Juan chasing and then kissing her. Maria Concepcion proceeds to the workplace where Mr. Givens, an American archaeologist, is digging up the prehistoric Indian site where Juan works for him, and then goes to market. Givens, we learn, has covered for Juan's philandering and troubles with the law before this time. Juan and Maria Rosa run away to fight in the Civil War a few days later. Maria Concepcion does not have any public reaction, and when her baby is born and dies 4 days later, she doesn't have any public reaction to that either. She continues working, going to church, taking communion. The neighbors think of her as proud, since Maria Concepcion does not accept their sympathy. After 2 years, Juan and a pregnant Maria Rosa return home without Juan getting any official leave. So Juan is going to be shot as a deserter, except when the American vouches for him and takes charge of him. Juan finds being married legally in the church oppressive. He prefers Maria Rosa to Maria Concepcion, but will not hurt his legal wife. Maria Rosa gives birth to a son. Juan gets drunk to celebrate. He goes home to beat Maria Concepcion, but she refuses to be beaten and leaves Juan to sleep it off. She trusses up her fowls for market, and on the way she starts to weep. Later, as Juan awakens from his drunk, he sees Maria Concepcion with her long knife. Maria Concepcion drops to her knees, whispers to Juan urgently, and he promises to hide and protect her. The two are eating dinner together when the police arrive with the news that Maria Rosa has been murdered. They join the villagers at Maria Rosa's hut. Lupe recounts what she heard of the murder. She enjoys the prominence, the menacing importance of being a witness on page 783, but blames the spirit of evil rather than any actual person. Villagers speak in support of Maria Concepcion's good character. She is not arrested. Juan and Maria Concepcion take the baby home with them. As Juan goes to sleep, she gives the baby goat milk and falls asleep herself. And Maria Concepcion is happy as the story closes. We have an omniscient narrator inside everybody's head. On page 773 at the top of the page, Maria Concepcion calling herself Maria Concepcion Gutierrez de Villegas, as though she owned an entire hacienda. It must be people in the village that think of her as a little bit above herself. It's just kind of everybody who thinks this. Then on pages 773 and 74, you have Maria Concepcion's thought, if I do not eat honey now, I shall mark my child. And then on page 775, the narrator is in Givens's mind as well. 3 paragraphs down, her grand manner reminded him of royalty and exile. We have Juan's thoughts on page 778. Down in the bottom third of the page, he found himself unaccountably back in his own house. The only person who would know whether Juan expected to find himself back in his own house or not is Juan, so we're inside Juan's head. And we know his motivation for beating Maria Concepcion, that he wants to reestablish himself in his legal household. We're inside the gendarme's head on page 781. They flashed their lanterns right below the middle of the page, almost apologetically, upon the pleasant, harmless scene of a man eating supper with his wife. They are the ones that would know if they feel almost apologetic. They are the ones who know if the scene is actually harmless and pleasant. As another aspect of the narrative method, you have a certain indirection. The murder is not spelled out. You have this big event entirely left out on page 779. You have Maria Concepcion's point of view, and then you have a break before Juan awakens slowly. And within this narrative break, somewhere, the murder takes place. Another aspect of the narrative method is that people are presented with limited self-knowledge. So on page 779, at the beginning of the second paragraph, she suddenly has some self-knowledge. At once, with an inner quivering, she came to her senses completely, recognized the thing that troubled her so terribly, was certain of what she wanted. So up to this point, she hasn't been aware of what's really bothering her about this situation, or about what she really wanted. The baby, she didn't really know until now that what really bothers her is that Maria Rosa has Juan's baby and she does not. So up to this point, Maria Concepcion has not been aware of what she really wants. And then down page 779, at the end of the third full paragraph, all her being was a dark, confused memory of grief burning in the heart, of deadly, baffled anger. So she is still confused rather than having self-awareness. Juan's self-awareness is also presented as limited on pages 781 and 784. At the end of the first paragraph, when his wife calls him Juanito mío, my little Johnny, he could not fathom this woman. He felt too that she had become unique and invaluable, a woman without equal in a million women, and he could not tell why. On page 784, after the investigation is complete and Maria Concepcion has been allowed to go home with the baby, down below the middle of the page, having secured her safety, compelled by an instinct he could not in the least comprehend, he forgot her. There survived in him only a vast, blind hurt, like a covered wound. Another thing that's interesting in this story is the way Maria Concepcion is characterized. She has this intimidating quality at the very beginning of the story, where at our first glimpse, we are viewing her through the eyes of her trussed-up fowl. Page 772, she's walking carefully. She's carrying a dozen living fowl with their feet all fastened together. They peer into her face inquiringly. She doesn't see them. She's very unsentimental about these birds that she has all tied up and thrown over her shoulder. shoulder. She is called a woman of valor by the American on page 774. Dios, woman, but you have valor. I'm from Guadalajara. There we have valor for everything. But the villagers on page 775 and 76, right down toward the bottom of the page, people shrugged when Maria's husband and girlfriend run away. There was a popular belief among her neighbors that Maria Concepcion was not so mild as she seemed. She is mere stone, says old Lupe when the baby dies. On page 776, women suggest that they have quite a bit in common with Maria Concepcion, and we should suffer together. And Maria Concepcion insists on standing apart from her. The villagers, when she ends up being suspected of murder, guard her, refuse to admit ill of her, say that she has a good reputation on page 783. The fundamental conflict in this story is a conflict between what goes under the heading of Christianity and instinct. Within Maria Concepcion, this is an internal conflict because the story views her as both primitive, responding in an elemental way to the circumstances in her life, while she regards herself as a good Christian. So take a look at page 772, where in the middle of the page, Maria Concepcion walks with the free, natural, yet guarded ease of the primitive woman. And then on page 775, she goes regularly to church, she lights candles before the saints, she receives Holy Communion once a month. She's a very good Catholic. On page 776, the reason for her husband running away and her baby dying is that she is being punished for her pride. So she has a conflict between the primitive, instinctual part of her character and her Christianity, her sense of being very dignified and reserved, her being above the rest of the villagers. The instinct that she follows leads her to kill Maria Rosa on page 779. That's described in very physical terms and landscape terms. Her tears are like a secret, slow-moving river. Her calamity is a physical experience as sharp and certain as the bite of thorns, etc. Now, one does not have this conflict between his instinct and from being married in the church. He describes on pages 777 and 78 to Gibbons what his attitude is toward the two women. And on page 780 and 781, he finds himself instinctually taking over and protecting Maria Concepcion. On page 784, he finds himself compelled by an instinct to do so. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think of this contest between instinct and Catholicism.